So summer's over and fall's here, and with fall came a little bit of rain, and that was very much appreciated, having the drought that we had this summer. In light of the drought, and with fear of impending droughts in the future, I've decided to make a hugelkultur bed. Now, a hugelkultur bed is essentially a technique to help retain water in your soil, and that's usually not such an issue where we live because of the kind of high clay content of the soil. But this summer was devastating, the worst drought in 130 years according to some sources. So any steps that we can go toward using less water for our crops would be very much appreciated. Hugelkultur is essentially buried wood. You dig a hole in the ground like I have here. You put a whole bunch of wood and organic matter onto it, you bury it, and the wood helps to hold moisture, and as it rots it releases nutrients into the soil, and that's the point of the hugelkultur, is it greatly reduces your water usage, adds nutrients into the soil, and helps with the vitality of your garden, especially in drought-stricken years. So what I have here is a hole that I've dug down to the subsoil, that reddish clay, or sometimes grayish colored, that marks the sterile level. Now I've got a whole bunch of wood matter to go into the hugelkultur. I've got some old firewood from years ago that was never used and left outside and is starting to rot. I've got a whole bunch of apple tree trimmings from when I pruned in the spring, and they've been drying since, and a bunch of alders. Be careful if you're using alders in your hugelkultur pits, simply because alders are extremely versatile and tough plant, and if they're not, if the shoots are not entirely dead, they might take root in the soil. This spring I used several fresh cut alders as stakes, and those stakes soon sprouted leaves and started rooting, so be mindful of that. The first thing you want to do is gather up all of your organic matter that you're going to use, your wood, and trim it up so it'll fit nicely within the hole that you've dug. You don't have to strip all of the little branches off the sticks or anything of the sort. Just make sure that there's no odd angles that would stick out of the mound once you have the wood into it. Apple trees are notorious for this. They grow like their cousins, the roses, in all sorts of different directions, and so you might have to spend some time on that. It is a bit of a shame using apple wood. In the hugelkultur, apple wood is a very dense, beautiful wood. It's wonderfully useful for tool handles and other sorts of things. But we have so much of it here, and so much of what we have is not of suitable size or quality for that we're going to put it in the hugelkultur bed. It'll take longer to break down than the alders and other wood in here by virtue of its denseness, but hopefully that also means that it'll provide water into the ground for much longer. First thing I'm going to do is take these old pieces of firewood and put them in the pit, and sort of form a base for the rest of the organic matter that'll go in. There's all the old firewood put into the hole. You don't have to line it like that, of course. It's just how I felt that I wanted to do it. There's no real absolute correct way to do a hugelkultur. Just throw the wood in as however you want. I put the wood around the outside to try to provide a bit of a framework for the smaller pieces that will go into the inside, but it's not at all necessary to do it that way. So there's what it looks like with all the rest of the wood in. So I started at the bottom with the large, or the pieces of firewood rather, formed the frame, threw some long logs on top of that, and then added progressively smaller pieces of wood up until I dealt with twigs and little branches. I've got a couple big pieces on top of that. Again, for the most part, this is apple wood, but there's also alders, a little bit of wire birch, some spruce and maple and stuff like that, but for the most part apple trimmings. Now, one of the things you might notice is that there's an awful lot of gaps in here. There's lots of space. Now, over time, as this rots in the ground, that will settle, but you might want to take a little bit of time like I did and trample on this as you build it. been several days since we stacked the wood up here in the Hugelkultur. The reason for the delay in getting back is because we had several days of rain, but that's good. After you pile your wood in and before you cover everything up, you do want to make sure that everything gets a good soaking. Didn't run the lines for that, just let nature do it. So this has been rained on for a little bit. I'm gonna kind of stomp over it and try to drive out any little critters that might have crawled in underneath. This time of year, wood piles become a great refuge for little critters trying to get away from the impending cold. But after that, and before I cover it with dirt, I'm going to add all of this old hay that I'd mowed up a while ago and left kind of moldering. And that's great. You need that kind of organic matter on top of the other organic matter you've already piled. So you get several kind of grades of organic matter that will decompose at different rates. And again, at the very bottom, you've got these large pieces of log moving up through ever increasingly smaller branches and twigs. You know, not uniformly, of course. You've got a couple larger ones on top. But you cover all of that with organic material such as hay or leaves or something of the sort, and then cover it with dirt. So we're going to do that and see how that turns out. That's what it looks like with all the hay thrown on top of it. Now this wasn't dry hay, this is hay that was just been piled up and had been kind of moldering, and that's fine for what we need it for this, which is to supply organic matter that will rot in the ground. Similar to the sticks, once I put the hay on this, I trampled over it a bunch of times, packed it down as tightly as I could, fill up any gaps. Again, some of those gaps will remain and fill in over time as the Hugelkultur breaks down. The next step now is to cover it in dirt. And there's what the finished Hugelkultur looks like. It's just a raised bed. That's the dirt over top of the hay, which is over top of the sticks and twigs, which is over top of the logs. Now, of course, the idea for this is that the, pardon my shadow, the idea for this is that water will be absorbed into the underlying organic matter, which will decompose slowly and steadily and help in the retention of water in the soil. It's not the prettiest mound. The ground is very, very wet, so it's pretty heavy. Again, there's a bit of a high clay content in this soil, so kind of yucky, but we'll see how that works out over the long term. It's again a bit of a raised bed, so it might be good for things like squashes and melons next year when we actually do plant. So that's that.